15 minutes and discussing personnel matter. We'll now move on to the land acknowledgement. Marnie, if you would go in with that.
Pardon me, using the microphone. Yeah, I want to express gratitude for a reminder we received during the previous session, previous to this workshop, where we talked about a land acknowledgement not as an end in itself, but as one way of honoring the land and indigenous communities. But it really isn't an accomplishment in itself to have and share a land acknowledgement. It is simply one way of showing respect that can be followed with relationship and action. So I will gladly read now our land acknowledgement. South Whidbey School District would like to begin by acknowledging that we gather on the ancestral homelands, originally known as Chekolchi in Lushootseed, of the coastal Salish peoples, on the lands of the lower Skagit, Tulalip, Swinomish, Snohomish, Stillaguamish, and Suquamish, who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin since time immemorial, and who have hunted, fished, and gathered, and taken care of these lands. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and we honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. Please join us in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude to the Indigenous people of this territory for their enduring care and protection of the land, which we currently occupy and share through the Treaty of Point Elliott, signed by 82 tribes in Mukilteo on January 22nd, 1855. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to discussing exactly how this board workshop goes, and it is a little different than usual in the time of hybrid meetings. So we will be, as a board workshop, we invite the participation of members of the community in whatever topics are currently being discussed on the agenda. So we'll be engaging in these discussions first with those in person, and then we'll be going in with Q&A. If you would like to join the conversation from home, please use the Q&A function and be sure to include your name and your area, the area you're from, just Langley, Freeland, Clinton, Oak Harbor, whatever it might be. We'll ask that the people, anyone commenting in person, also begin their comment with that, just so we have everything the same, as much the same as possible in person and via Zoom. It's important to note that we do have some policy around conduct in these meetings, and we ask that all comments, if you have a complaint, we welcome complaints and concerns. Please address them to the idea rather than a person, or an event rather than a person, just to make sure that we can have these conversations in an open manner. I believe that's everything we have there. So we'll move on to the agenda as presented. Without any, barring any complaint, we will accept the agenda as presented. No comment, the agenda has been accepted as presented. We will now move on to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion in regards to the consent agenda? It has been moved and seconded. Let's make sure we use the mics. Thank you. It has been moved and seconded. Is there any conversation on the consent agenda? I expect not, but I always like to make sure.
No, thank you.
With no discussion to be had, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda as presented, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, please say nay. The consent agenda has been approved as presented. Now we're going to move into the workshop portion of this. And this is the part where we do welcome and encourage the participation of those in the room here with us and those listening at home. We'll start with Community Advisory Committee updates. Dr. Moshe?
Thank you. I'm going to turn this over to the people who actually chair those advisory committees. And the first one is the bond committee. So it'll be JJ, and he has the mic. So here we go. Thank you, JJ.
Good evening to the board and to the community. It's just an update for our facilities bond advisory committee. First, I'd just like to kind of show the names on here for meeting the team. Dan Poolman, myself, David Nelson, Leo Langer, Aubrey Waldron, Brooke Burley, Eric Jokainen, Kimmy Johnson, and Paul Lagerstedt. So we've well, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself here. This is the team. We've kind of met back in 2019, early 2020, and the team has pretty much stayed the same, which is actually kind of helped out for moving, picking up right where we left off. But the next slide will show that the timeline that we're kind of working with here. So back in December and back in 2019-20, we created projects from the facilities assessment and based on our educational and facilities needs. So with that, let's see, I kind of lost my place here, sorry. So right now, we've just had our second meeting. We've kind of defined our bigger projects that we have. We still have a lot of work to do, but basically from January to July, we'll refine these projects, which you'll see on the next slide, and really work with our stakeholders and our community. And none of these are any priority list or any of that nature. It's just kind of what we put together. So, to top off with the list, 712 campus, of course, to build an exterior siding, downspouts vents, that one's been a high priority item, I think, for quite a while. And community has, shared their opinion on that as well. And a lot of these can be kind of grouped up in certain areas. We just haven't, we still got, like I said, we still got a lot of refining to do on that part. Parking lot improvements, exterior lighting is what we're looking at. That's a district-wide type project. Remodel of restrooms, locker rooms at South Campus, along with 712 campus. So, what that looks like, we're still in the works of that, but there's definitely a need. If you look at our last major modernization, it was almost 30 years ago. So if you think about any mechanical piece of equipment or fixture in your house, it's pretty much lived its life expectancy. We're looking at doing the football field, artificial turf, possible stadium improvements, press box, things of that nature. HVAC upgrades, 5-6 campus, 712 campus. It kind of ties with a roofing project at the high school. You're gonna replace a roof, you might as well do the curbing at that point as well. New multi-purpose building possibly at the K4 campus. This would help in line with the K6 coming up, or I should say 5-6 coming up. It's pretty tight turnover, lack of time in the gym for the kids due to lunchtime, things of that nature. The building exterior siding would be, siding, paint, seal the bricks. That's K4. Covered walkway structure from the K4 campus to the 5-6 campus, along with possibly adding structures, type covered structures for the front for parent pickup, things like that. New multi-purpose building, that'd be for the 712 campus, athletics, PE, storage. So, what these things, really look like? Is that an enclosed building or is that a more of a pavilion structure? That's stuff that we're trying to narrow down at this point. We'll continue to work with the current stakeholders and community as we move forward. And the last was, which would probably tie in with the siding project, would be the main athletics entryways. So to update and possibly create a covered section, but it's really at the beginning stages at this point. And like I said, we have a lot of work to do, but we're meeting twice a month now at this point, and we really want to get this moving forward as fast as possible. That's pretty much it.
Do you have any questions for JJ or for Dan? They're chairing this committee, and they do have a team, but the public is certainly also welcome to provide input.
May I just briefly offer a thought to the two of you? And that thought is that the community relations aspect of bond readiness feels important. And I would just ask that you think about that in the makeup of your committee in terms of whether there are people who are really great at the community relations aspect of what you're up to. And if you need any thought partnership I could just take off my board hat, put on my community member hat, and be in conversation about that with you if it would be helpful.
And I just wanted to note that the entire bond process is separate from the levy that will be on the ballots this February to provide necessary material funding for materials and teachers and field trips and that sort of thing. This is a very separate financial stream.
Yes, it's a capital project, and it won't go to the voters until almost a year from now, next November. So it seems like a long way off, but there's a whole lot of work to be done around architects and engineers and really defining the projects and getting the public involved and the board ready to approve whatever goes on the ballot. To get it on the ballot, it's a July timeframe, which is why this is so quick.
I didn't have any other questions or comments, but if there are any from here, I don't see any online. If there are any from anyone present, please feel free to raise your hand and let us know. Otherwise, we can move on because we have a lot of things on the agenda.
We want to update on the other advisory teams, so I'll leave it to start with John and we'll go around.
Test, there I am. Okay, I'm co-chairing the Southwood Beach School District School Culture Advisory Committee, co-chairing with Mrs. Phillips. We had our first meeting on December 13th. We had about 16 members, and it's growing. I think we have a good representation of students, parents, staff members, and community members. I would like everybody to appreciate the broadness of this topic, school culture. It involves a lot of really important aspects, such as you're talking about equity, you're talking about SEL. So there's many different things that kind of are under this umbrella. So a lot of important things that we're doing. Our first meeting, we did introductions, we made some norms, agreements, had some breakout groups, and discussed the process, primary topics that the committee members would like to see discussed, and also gave some data for the members to look at. Again, we have a lot of data. I think Kayla will talk a little bit about it, surveys, et cetera, that our district utilizes that we can share and really go through that information. So Kayla, would you like to?
Thanks, Kayla Phillips. And many of you. I'm very thankful for the diverse group of our committee members. We have parents, community members, and students as well. So thankful for a lot of viewpoints, which is nice. We're really trying to pull in those lenses that we're looking at, because school culture is such a broad umbrella term. So when you ask 17 people what their hopes or what they're looking for out of this committee, we have 17 different platforms that people are interested in looking at. So knowing that this is a long-term conversation we'll be having, we're looking at what are the immediate conversation points we want to look at. We were hoping health use survey results from the fall would be out, but they won't be out until March. So we'll bring that into the conversation once we have access to those, but we have our Caring School Community SEL curriculum. We have some survey results. So we're pulling directly from student voice. Dan will speak about the Title IX survey that we're going to dig into, as well as some other some surveys we've done K-12 to look at what are our students telling us so that we can frame our time together on what our students are telling us around school culture so that we can move forward with that. And then continue elevating student voice and then review of some of the social emotional curriculum that we bring into our schools.
Thank you for the work. We're going to turn to Jeff now for an update on his advisory team.
Hi, everybody. Jeff Fankhauser. I chair the special ed advisory team. Our meeting is tomorrow. And so my update to the board is I'm looking forward to our first meeting with our community members and looking forward to doing many of those things that happened in the meeting last that we just discussed. So I would end with a plea. If you are interested in participating in the special education advisory team meeting, please join us 6 p.m. tomorrow night.
And is that on Zoom or in person?
Thank you, Mr. Wolford. Absolutely on Zoom, and I'm happy to send that to anybody that would like. Just have them reach out to me. Absolutely.
Can you hear me now? There we go. My name is Susie Richards. I'm the principal of the K-4 elementary school. I previously was leading a group, the advisory enrichment team, and we had our meeting in December with members of that group after a long hiatus, and really had a request from folks to refocus our energy on student and family support. And I talked to Dr. Moshe, and she was in support of that. So we're kind of rebranding ourselves to really put focus on some of the immediate needs we have right now. And so in terms of student needs, we're going to be working real closely with Readiness to Learn and their team around the tutor mentor program and how do we expand some of those options. Homework club volunteer coordination. The South Woodby Schools Foundation has expressed some interest in possibly supporting a volunteer coordinator again. I actually met with Brooke Cornwell, who served as a volunteer coordinator, and she's putting a proposal together for us right now about what that could look like in the time of COVID. More mental health supports, of course, and that's happening district wide. So we'll just try to keep updated, not doing the work so much as keeping everyone updated on what is happening. As many of you, I'm sure, has heard, the South Woodby Children's Center is ending their school age after school program. And I've met a couple times with Caitlin. While the district has made it clear, we unfortunately are not able to take that on or lead that kind of an initiative. We also want to be partners in how we can support their efforts to see what might be next steps. And then we have a really dynamic group of people who have stepped forward to help reactivate our nutrition committee, Emmy Gunn, and a group of really go-getters. So I'm actually going to be, we've met with them once and we'll be meeting again. And I believe they're meeting with some members of the board as well. They did a visit to Coopville and of course now have their eyes on some of those exciting things that are happening up there. Around family support needs, we have all lost our PTA programs over the course of COVID, and that's really a need. And so we're going to be working to how do we help reactivate? How do we help get some of those pieces back in place? Lisa Honold is a member of our team, and she is a national expert around issues around screen time and the impacts on children. So we're hoping to do some education and outreach around some of those really concerning issues. Our ALE families really are active. We had a really wonderful ALE parent meeting last night with a guest presenter on positive parenting. So they have a real desire to get involved and activate and do more parent education as well. And then how do we thoughtfully prepare to bring more members of our community back into our schools? So that's our report. Any questions?
Susie, Marnie, and I did meet with the food committee and would love to chat with you and Joe maybe after the meeting for just a few minutes, and so I don't forget about it.
I would also add that our student board representatives have also been doing really good thinking on the subject of foods. And we did mention that to the folks working on the wellness plan so that there can be a concert of efforts.
Hello, Christy Macaro with the Communications Advisory Team. We've had we had our first meeting on December 7th. And unfortunately, we have a very slim group, and we even lost one over break who said they couldn't take it on. So currently there was only one person that attended, but it's okay because we're still fighting, trying to get all the communication out there. Ian Turner has been essential at helping us with the website. So there is major movement and trying to move pages over from the current site, figure out what's essential, what's not essential, what needs to be changed, going on right now behind the scenes. But there is actually I won't put it up yet because not ready to be seen, but we've already got a website going with Final Site that is looking good. So we've changed the way, hoping to make finding things easier. And so one of the big things that I asked of the advisory team is, how would you like to find stuff? So please send me emails if there's a better way that you think. We're willing to take it all and try to put it together. But where things should be, like, should this be under the student section? Should this be under the parent section? Should this be under the staff section? Just make it really easy for everyone. The other big thing is Parent Square. We got it up and running right now just for staff. We're getting staff on board so that they can get used to it. But I've sent a bunch of videos, so if staff are listening in, watch those videos because you can see what it can do for us. The communication, basically, it makes it essential for the parents, the families, to be able to get communication the way they want it. And they can choose and they can change how they receive it, however, whenever they need to. So it's moving and we're communicating as best we can. So read the Navigator. I work really hard every month to do it.
We appreciate it.
Thank you very much, everyone who is that all of them, I believe? Yep. Thank you very much for all of the presentations, all of the commentary on what's happening. And also thank you very much to all of those who have volunteered or been voluntold of their time to lead and participate in these committees. It's very valuable for us to have people working on these issues alongside the in-school efforts so we can get input from the community and from students and from families and from staff and everyone to make sure that we're doing not just what works in the district, but what's right for the students in the district and what's right for our community as a whole. We'll now move on to the Title IX student survey. Mr. Pullman.
Okay, so this was a student survey for the high school, so it's grades 9 through 12, and it was done last February of 2021. And need a few considerations as we think about this, that this was taken during a time of a pandemic, that our freshmen who were new to the high school had actually never been to the high school. We were in a remote situation. So when we look at some of the experiences, we asked them, what was your experience in the last 12 months? They actually didn't have an experience in the high school during that time frame. So we have to think about that as we look at these answers. Also, we were using Zoom and remote things. So there's that lack of personal connection that and I think about freshmen, probably had never met some of the teachers in person and had that time to develop that relationship with them. So that also is a way of looking at some of the answers. And some of the responses were so small that we really couldn't get a detail that we could share with them. One, it would identify things that we wouldn't want to, such as people, but also it's really small. We also had no discipline data because you're remote. And then there's just questions related to 12 months. And I think that as we look at this, we'll see that some of the responses may have been previous experiences that they carried forward potentially because they hadn't been on campus since March of 2020, the previous year. So the question we think about as we look at this is how does it really relate to the culture at the high school with some of those considerations. So the survey was in February. We got the raw data, converted it into Excel, disaggregated it. We also collected the CEE survey information from a similar time frame as a couple months later. And then that information was shared with building administrators in June as we kind of went through the information to see what we thought it might be telling us. Broke the information down for your purposes by some demographics, looking at gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, grade levels, some smaller subgroups or bands to see if there was variations that we would see in there based on the responses. And the questions were grouped in basically 3 generic areas and then asked multiple times to try to get to some definition in those areas. And the first one was basically the system, things like talking about discipline and things that happen like that. And then there was questions related to staff-student relationships. How were those? And then student-to-student interactions. What happened with that? And every question that we looked at was basically a strongly disagree, a neutral response, an agree, or a strongly agree response. And what I've listed is those that were agree or disagree, and you can realize there's going to be a large section that is a neutral response. They didn't respond one way or the other. And if you look at there's an average on each of these charts. So if we look at the school rules are fair for all, we'll see that roughly 30% of students said, yes, I agree with that. 35 or 36% said, no, I disagree with that. And that leaves you with the other roughly third who had a neutral response to it. The other thing as we look at this is I look for variations. If we look at these subgroups that we identified through the demographics, and I circled an example. When we look at the rules are fair for all, a smaller percentage of the female population agreed with that than the male population. And if we look at the disagree, you see the inverse of that. So it starts giving you these pictures based upon these different populations that we have, within the building. So I'll go through these and you can kind of use your own judgment as far as what you believe or anything that you think is important that we may or may not want to talk about. The first group is kind of more of a systems group. Students are suspended, without a good cause. The average of about 12% agreed with that, and 50% disagreed. So they felt that there was fairness in there. And then you have another percentage, 40%, that just didn't have an opinion basically on that. And again, we start looking at, you can look at grade groups and see that, sometimes you'll say, oh, the sophomores really agree with that, but the freshmen didn't. Again, I would ask, how are the freshmen coming up to that conclusion if they hadn't been in the high school prior to this? Are they using their middle school experience or something else as their basis for that answer? Again, same type of questions, talking about punishment for breaking rules. We're talking about how are the rules applied? Are they evenly applied for all students? That type of thing. Again, a fairly even split between agree, neutral, disagree, and some variations based on classes or different subgroups. And students accused of doing something wrong, do they get a chance to explain? You're looking at fairly similar responses. About 30% agree that they do, 20% disagree, and then a bigger, neutral section in there. And again, are there any big discrepancies? On the agree side, not so much. On the disagree side, you see some bigger discrepancies in there as far as, who responded to that particular question. Then we get into the student and staff relationships. And, this is pretty encouraging that you look at this and they're asking about, is there an adult that wants me to do well? Almost a 90% average, with some groups higher than that. and basically less than 1% saying, no, there's nobody that, cares about me doing well. And, that's a very positive thing. I don't know what the sophomore thing is. I guess all the kids that said no were sophomores. But anyways, that one looked very promising. And
Dan,
again,
can you just go back to that for a
I'd be
second?
glad to.
I think it's really important. This one calls it out most obviously to look at the bottom in terms of the percentages because the lines are deceiving. So it's 3% on the sophomores and 3% of 100 kids is 3 students. So again, just to have some perspective.
Yeah, the scale is very important on this.
You do need to look at the numbers because sometimes it does look like it's really out of whack, but it might only be a 2% difference or something on there. But again, positive on that one. And then, question about there's an adult I could talk to if I had a personal problem. The one I'd look at this is that 15% say no. So I think there's work to be done there because hopefully you looked at the previous one and almost everybody said they want me to do well, but do I feel comfortable talking to them? And it's also very similar as, can I get help with homework? You got 10% as an average saying, I don't feel comfortable asking. So some relationship building in there. And, I do wonder if part of that's because of the remote work. They're not in class with the staff that would, normally be working with them. So it'll be interesting to see when we run this again in a few months, if this changes now that they've been in class for 6 months. So that's my wondering when I look at some of these numbers. And then there's questions about basically our staff listening to students and, care about what they have to say. Again, the average 50% agree, a little less than 14% disagree with that. So again, you're seeing that same 10, 15% that you kind of get on some of these questions about, I feel uncomfortable talking to staff or, that type of question. And then there's, our students treated with respect, almost identical to the previous question as far as percentages, over 60% say, yeah, we're treated with respect. And a little over, probably 11% say we don't agree with that, which is very similar to the previous question as far as percentages. And then a question about, our students treated fairly by staff regardless of race or ethnicity. So we're kind of narrowing down that question a little bit. But again, it's almost identical percentages to the generic question. And then we move into the student-to-student activity, and we start talking about things like reports of unwanted sexual attention, et cetera, are taken seriously at this school. And you see this is basically a 1/3 split. 1/3 agree, 1/3 neutral, and 1/3 disagree with that. But this is when you can start seeing some of those bigger variations in some of the answers, whether it's the agree or disagree part. The question about, I believe the district responds seriously to these reports. Again, about 30% agree, another 20% disagree, and a bigger part in the middle. But again, when you start looking at that, you start looking at variations in these subgroups that start to create these trends or patterns that you may see over time as far as how they answer these questions. And, if you look at the non-heterosexual versus heterosexual, you'll start seeing, a difference in the agree and a difference in the disagree. And again, you have to look at the numbers because it may appear to be different more than it is, but there are some differences in here. And this is one that, we've done some work on already, and I know that the high school has given information out, but it's like, who do I report to if there's an issue? And what I got from this was 30% of the students said, I don't know. Again, they've been gone for a year. Maybe they, we haven't reinforced it, but it's one of the steps that we took after looking at this of how do we let them know what to do? Because it's important that everybody knows how to respond in a situation. And then looking at questions like students in the school respect each other's for their differences. And you can see we're again at that about, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 breakdown. But there are some variations. If you look at female versus male, you'll see some substantial differences in there and some, some of those other subgroupings. But you start looking at those. And what we're starting to see is I think we're starting to see some trends as far as which of the groups respond the way they do. And then questions about, teasing sexual topics at the school. Again, you got that similar type of breakdown. And again, if you look at the differences, that's where you see a big variation in, some of the groups as opposed to the agree, which are more similar. So again, it starts to inform. And then that students are treated the same regardless of their gender or sexual identity. I would have liked to have clarified this a little more. Are they treated by other students? Are they treated by staff, or is it a combination? So I'm not real clear on this one on who they're responding about. But again, you can start seeing some variations in some of these groups. Bullying is a problem at this school. Fewer people, agreed with that than disagreed. But still, there is some agreement. And if you look at the variations, female and male is a good example of this, is where you see a difference in perspective as far as if there's bullying going on or not. This question is about other students stepping in, trying to stop some of this behavior. Again, it's that roughly, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 breakdown. Interesting, seniors agree that, yeah, they're going to do that more than juniors or sophomores, but freshmen are gung-ho, they're going to do that too. And is it a maturity thing as they get older and feel more confident in their ability to have that interaction? Or is it things that we've done in some of the training programs that we've been providing the kids at the high school to give them the tools to do those things? And that would be my hope. And this question is about being teased or put down about sexual orientation. And you'll again see that if you start looking at the male-female breakdown, that there's a big variation in there. Some variations with ethnicity, sexuality, some of those type things. And then we asked them specific questions about how many times have these behaviors happen? And it's basically, it never happened to me, or it happened once, twice, that type of thing. And basically there's a survey average at the top. So you can see in this one about being physically hurt, that 92% of our students say it's never happened to me. So, which groups happen more often that? And you can see in this particular one as an example that it's those with disabilities and those with male. And if you break the males down more, you see it's freshmen. So, it starts looking at that type of thing. And then, did somebody steal or break something? Again, we were in a remote situation, so you wonder how are they answering these questions when they say that, 9.6% of the students said that this happened to me at least one time. So again, you start looking at or thinking about where is this activity occurring if we are responding in a remote situation, or is it just a previous experience? Then we ask questions about how do you feel, people leaving you out of things. And again, there's some groups that have those lower percentages that say never, which means that, if you say never 67% of the time, that means it happens 33% of the time to that particular group. So, what does that tell us? And then questions about people that have continued to harass you after you've gone out with them, where do you see those discrepancies? And that type of question. And then they're, getting into this, we talked about, okay, how many times have people made these unwelcome comments, jokes, or gestures that made you feel uncomfortable? And this one I found very interesting, because if you look at never, the average is 64%, but we have some that are 50 in the 50% range. That means half of them are going to say yes to that question in there. And then we asked them about social media. how many, times have somebody said something about you on social media that's harmful? And the majority of them said never. So it leads you to that question, at least it did to me, is if we're not in school and they're not doing it on social media, where is this behavior occurring? Or is it a carry forward of previous activity? And I think that's something that we need to try to identify in the next survey as far as where is this occurring if it's not there. And that's basically what the first paragraph says. But I think, we can spend more time. You can dive into this data. It's set up so that you can select multiple groups and start to really narrow down to get more information if we need to. But as we look through this, I think you can come to an agreement that there's basically, these subgroups of gender, ethnicity, and sexual orientation that had the wider varieties in their answers as far as how they responded to a specific question. An example would be, if we look at ethnicity and questions in there, you'll see that the dark line on the top are those that reported that they were of a non-white, and those that had a lower percentage were white. So if we talk about the first one, or any students are treated the same regardless of their gender or sexual identity, there's a lower percentage in one group versus the other. And it's a pattern that you pretty much see in a lot of these answers. I could show you the same thing with, gender or some of the others, but we saw the same type of patterns in there that created over time. Also looked at the CEE survey, which came through, and as the board, you have seen that. But I came up with a few conclusions when I looked at this, is that this is very promising when we looked at the CEE survey, in that it compared 1920 to 2021. And what we saw in the questions related to the topics that we were talking about in this survey is there's a substantial increase in a lot of these. Some of these are 18% increase in positive experiences. So that, hopefully leads you to believe that we are improving what we're doing in this environment. There are also 3 new questions that we won't have an answer for until we do the next CE survey. But I want to point out something I thought fascinating, which I also saw with staff in the CE survey. But if we look at the question that says, most students are respectful of others at the school, it's 58% positive. But if you look at the question that says, I am respectful of others at the school, it's 96% positive. We saw a very similar correlation with staff of I'm very respectful, but maybe everybody else isn't. So I find that fascinating when we see those things, and it happens in different groups like that. So we're going to do another survey, and that'll give us something to compare this previous one to, and hopefully, we can get students to understand we really want the experience that happened from September 1 through whatever date the survey is. So it's real current. This is what, because we're trying to look at culture and not what was 3 years ago or 5 years ago or whatever. Information being shared with students, comparing it to the CE survey, which we've done. We're discussing at the school board, which is what we're doing today in the community. We have put posters up and cards to kids so that they know how to report instances of this if they need to. And we're working on restorative practices. Kate is coming into the high school to do some relationship information, because some of these questions related to that. Continue with the social emotional learning. Again, the conversations with the United Student Leaderships, the continued student voice through our wonderful board representatives that we have here, and then some outside work with some of the groups that we're doing this year to try to improve what we're doing. We're at the end. If I could answer any questions, or if I can't, maybe some other administrator might.
Dan, it just makes me think about power dynamics when I look at this. Just do the groups that are reporting more often. I think the one that stood out to me a couple slides back was like, it's like close to like 20% of those subgroups had experienced 3 or more comments that made them feel uncomfortable. And how do we shift that power dynamic so that they are empowered to say something, and recognize that the person making that comment may not even be aware of how it makes the others feel. And so therefore, when they say, when we ask, do you think you're a kind person? We're responding in a kind way, right? They say yes. And that could be a genuine feeling. But that's what kind of stood out to me, is just how do we empower the voices with less power in that population to be able to speak their truth in a kind and gentle way.
Adding on to that, I think that's a fantastic point. Adding on to that, how do we reassure those in those groups that reporting it will have results? I think that we've made improvements in that. I think that I'm actually really, I love data. I love data a lot. I love seeing hard numbers behind soft sciences, even when they can be misleading in some cases, like the idea of things happening on campus in the last 12 months and we haven't been on campus in the last 9.5. So I think it's really fascinating that we've got these pretty clear numbers in some cases. We just have to figure out what exactly those mean and how to address them. And I know that our staff, our administrators and our staff are hard at work on that already and have been for the past years, but since they saw this first, and I'm really excited to see the numbers that come this year, because I expect them to be radically different in some cases. And in the ones that they're not radically different, it will show us where we have work to do. One thing I did want to note is that neutral responses, I remember from the CE survey presentation, those neutral responses are an opportunity for us. They're the people who are not convinced one way or the other. Yes, we want to change the minds of those who think that things are not going well, but the ones who are unsure often just need more information. And it sounds like y'all are already working on getting them that information, and that's fantastic. So
I'm also interested to see how the classes move forward too, because when the survey was taken, those seniors were experiencing classes at home. I mean, they all were, but they were in a particular part of their education, and then that sophomore class experienced part of freshman year and then got uprooted. And so I'm interested to see how far those freshmen go, kind of using that same extrapolation moving forward. By the time they're seniors, we should be able to see growth in the areas we want to see growth and opportunity actually come to fruition.
I want to put this out here for everyone and anyone who's interested in commenting, whether they're in the audience here at one of the tables, our student reps, anyone else. I did have a couple of thoughts going forward, not specific questions, but that question about students standing up for each other or standing up to each other on social media, that is so key and critical to me, because that is the place that we as educators, that particularly the dedicated staff that we have here on the campuses, can't reach them. And so that's a huge part. And I love that we're capturing that data, because I think that that will be one of the biggest indicators of cultural change. I'm also curious to see, there's lots of great disaggregated data here. One thing that I didn't see captured in any way was socioeconomic status. And I wonder if there's some way that we can connect this to McKinney-Vento status or students experiencing homelessness or something like that, because I think that that's another frequently underserved group of students.
Yeah, we didn't ask them about their social economic status, and we actually couldn't connect the two because it's anonymous. We have no way of knowing who's responding to these. The good thing is we did have 265 responses, which was like a 57% response rate. So we had a very large percent of students, but it'd be really difficult and to try to tie it into that because it is an anonymous survey.
That makes total sense. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. And I appreciate the difficulty of trying to get all of the data we can while only getting the data that we're allowed to. So these are questions that we asked, that we formulated?
Yes, this was a survey that we created specifically for South Whidbey. Looked at a lot of other surveys around the country and took the general ideas and then, modified those to get the answers that we were looking for specifically here.
Wonderful, thank you. I only brought that up because you mentioned that you wanted to change some of the questions, and it's good to know that we can. Excellent, thank you.
I'd be interested too, sorry, one more thing. I'd be interested too in disaggregating some of that data around heterosexuality and non-heterosexuality, because I noticed that gender was equated with female or male. And so I know that there's new and more accurate language around that we could be using in the future to enhance a survey user's opportunity to share who they are. And I think that would also talk to us about, what kinds of equities intersectionally are happening in our schools.
So
We can go through the data. It's set up that way where it has more definition to it. But again, you get down to numbers of 3 kids. And so I was really careful in doing a presentation that doesn't identify those, but as for our purposes, I can go in and look and see, you give me a combination of whatever, and I can give you the answers.
Yeah, just to be clear on that, we asked, we were inclusive in the language. It was just the N was so small that we didn't want to. So we did include non-binary or other or prefer not to answer.
And that was shown on one of the slides. It just didn't make it through because, again, that there are N of them, and N is such a small number that it's identifiable. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah. Just making the survey as accessible to kids as possible. So they want to fill it out. 57% is a huge number, especially in a remote setting. So excellent work.
Yeah, Kayla did a wonderful job with that survey. She's actually the person that had the kids fill it out, and she did a great job.
Agreeing with Anne, I would like to see a few more identities on there. I know we could look deeper into the data. Actually, back at the WASDA conference, we looked at some demographic sheets and we had military families on there. We also had single parent households, number of siblings. And I think those are really key data points to look at to reassess what barriers we need to remove. And I hope we can see that on the next survey.
And also how our data measures up with state data and make sure that we're ahead of the curve compared to the rest of the state.
Well, I don't know how we do either of those things because once again, we can ask the questions that you're suggesting, but the number of respondents may be so small that we can't report it to you. So that's number one. In terms of Saul's question, I would think that's hard because it's a unique survey to us. So we can do that with the CEE data survey that we send to students, but very different questions. So I'm not quite sure.
And I would add that the state data is not going even to this level that we're showing here, even to this level of diversity. So conversations around orientation or gender identity are not to the level that we are asking.
We can compare on the Healthy Youth Survey. That is more widespread data. So we could look at where we are compared to the state in that.
Using my coaching voice. There is a threshold, the state of Washington OSPI, I think it's 15, an N of 15 or less, you can't report it out to the public. So any kind of testing data, and I think the situation also. So again, the size of the N really.
And that's really why we didn't break down some of these categories, because they were 5, 7, very small numbers.
Thank you for that. That helps.
Yeah, and coaching voice works great for those of us in the room, but not so well for those watching on the stream. So thank you. Were there any other comments or questions on this?
Thank you. I think the survey, I think it was really good. I remember filling it out last spring, I believe. And the only question I have is, especially considering that it was taken during online learning, how seriously a lot of students, especially the younger grades, took the survey. And if there's a way to, there's no way to take that into consideration. But in the past, I know that students haven't taken it as seriously as they could. So I hope that that's not throwing off any of our data. But it's what we see is reassuring. At least for me, I see a lot of reassuring, and I see a lot of things that we can do better.
Yeah, I don't know about the validity of, every answer, but what I found in this, there's only 2 people that responded that had responses that weren't what I'd consider legitimate. They were outside of the
That's good,
normal,
yeah.
what should have been, just based on the language they used. So.
Yeah, I think that's a very useful data for us to have going forward, because I do think that it shows some discrepancies, and I'm going to be very interested to see discrepancies in perception. And I'm going to be very, very interested to see how that measures up to the next one. Thank you for putting the survey together and for gathering the data and presenting it. I always love surveys. I always love hearing. It's one way to get student voice and community voice and all of that. So thank you to everyone involved, and I'm looking forward to seeing how these change. We'll now move on. Again, I'm not seeing any comments or questions from online attendees. If you do have any comments or questions, please use the Q&A function and include your name and the community you're a part of, just the locality. For those in person, we welcome your comments also. Again, just raise your hand, or if you're behind me, cough, or don't cough, clear your throat. Don't cough, clear your throat or something, so I know you're here, or get the attention of one of these folks who can see. The wonderful thing about these workshops is we do have the opportunity to engage in discussion with the community on these agenda items. So if you do have a comment or question on one of these things that we're discussing, please just raise your hand. We'll bring the mic around so that those listening online can hear also. Now we'll move on to the board position vacancy. Just an update there, and we'll get any questions. Do you have something?
Real quick, Brooke, did you intend to skip over the board summary?
I did not intend to skip over the WASDA annual conference report. Thank you very much. This was on the WASDA annual conference report was on the agenda for our last meeting, but because the power was out, we wanted to push as many things as possible off to this meeting so we could have that community involvement. So we just dealt with necessary stuff at the last meeting. So this is one wonderful thing that we're going to go around and talk to all of those who actually attended and let them talk a little bit about their experience, about what they're bringing back with them from that experience. And we're going to start with just a couple of quotes and thoughts that bubbled up through that discussion. Marnie, since you gathered these particular quotes, do you want to lead off with those?
Sure, I'll just read what's on this slide. These are all things that were said or shared on screen or verbally by presenters during some of the main sessions and breakout sessions. Leadership is a team sport, Michelle Reed. Change moves at the speed of trust, which is roughly attributed to Stephen Covey. Our policies are not neutral. In relation to inequities, they are always doing one of these things: exacerbating, perpetuating, mitigating, or eliminating. And I could probably look through my notes and try to attribute that to somebody if you're curious. And what we fund is what gets done. Our budget reflects our values. Equity is reducing predictability of who succeeds and fails, interrupting practices that negatively impact diverse students, and cultivating the unique gifts and talents of each student. And the work of every superintendent is to create positive pathways for students in these extraordinary times.
This is just the picture that we took while we were all there masked up. And the idea of when we invest in joint training for board and administration, we build these relationships, skills, and culture as a leadership team. And one of the most valuable things for me, at least, was because this was technically a meeting in public, being able to just sit down and talk about where we come from and our thoughts and philosophies really helped me get to know the members of the leadership team, and was incredibly valuable for me. And with the idea that centering student voice is one of the most meaningful things we can do to improve education, we're going to start this conference report with our student reps. And one of the big things that came up was making sure to get student board rep input before any votes. And I think that that's one of the things that we've started doing this year or last year, and has been huge for me to hear from the students. So we're going to go to the students and hear what they thought about the conference. Thank you.
Oh, first off, I would just say the WASDA conference was an amazing experience. I attended it within my first month of being a representative on the school board. And it not only gave me the opportunity to connect with the board on our goals and our missions, it also allowed me to connect with other student reps in Washington and other board directors. You know, a lot of the student reps at the WASDA conference came from big school districts like Shoreline, or Seattle Public Schools or Pasco, and it allowed us to contrast, you know, the issues our schools are facing, but also overlap and see, you know, what worked for them, what isn't working for us, and how together as students we can move forward and make sure student voice is being heard across the state. On our first day, Sol and Marnie and I attended the board boot camp. It was pretty much going over our roles as board directors and representatives, and knowing the difference between the job of the superintendent and the job of the board, making sure we can be the most productive board members as possible, and forming a strong community. My favorite exercise from the board boot camp was probably when we were handed the testing demographics and we saw the differences between Black students, Asian students, white students, females, non-binaries, and males. And we asked the question, okay, we see these demographics, how can we close these gaps? And I hope that's something that we can do as a board, not only looking at testing, but also looking at the CEE survey that we looked at earlier, because we clearly saw big gaps of 20 to 50% varying from each identity. So that's huge. And so as a board, we also attended the keynote speaker, which was, I believe, Brooke Brown, the teacher of the year. We kind of learned about the difference between equity and equality, because for the past, I don't know how many years, we've seen the word equality being used over and over again, but it's so important to realize that we need equity if we want to reach equality. And as a district, I hope that's something we're focusing on. One quote I would like to read by Sonia Renee Taylor: "We will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal, other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature." Another valuable session I attended was the Small Schools Forum. There's very small districts. I think Thorpe has about maybe 200 students. So we really talked with the directors of WASDA to make sure our voice as a small district was heard and making sure we get the proper resources and the proper funding to have students succeed, especially compared to huge districts who get a lot more funding. But as a district, we might have the certain amount allocated to each student, but we need more for infrastructure and opportunities, especially on a rural island. It also, the final thing I got from the WASA conference, it was very motivating.
I agree with everything you said. Yeah, I think it's interesting. My greatest takeaways were that we're not alone. For us, we're always facing these uphill battles as student reps to be heard and to have our voices heard. And there were other student reps there, and we had really, really good conversations. So that was really the highlight for me, was meeting other student representatives from across the state and talking about the differences between districts, what certain districts are doing, rural versus urban, small versus large districts, and as you mentioned, sort of filling in the gaps and the inequities. And I think it's important, as you mentioned, about normal, not going back to normal. That was a big takeaway too, was with COVID, there's a lot of negative aspects, and we're going to struggle with those probably for the next couple months at least. But there's always opportunity to change and opportunity to grow when we're struggling. And through struggle, oftentimes that breeds growth. Bad times breed great individuals, the famous saying. And I think we need to use that as an opportunity. So that was a big takeaway for me, and how we can cooperate as a board and cooperate as a state and move forward and push together. So it was a great opportunity for me. I got to meet some great people, Chris Rakedahl, the speaker, what was her name? Erin Jones. Erin Jones was amazing. I encourage you to read her book. I read it in maybe 2 weeks afterwards. But you covered pretty much everything that I wanted to say. So you stole my thunder a little bit. Sorry.
Well, both of you stole the rest of our thunders. I'm trying to go back to November in my brain, and Kayla, it feels like 3 years ago. But I think the most valuable part of the conference for me was just us as a board having a chance to just sit and get to know each other. It wasn't lost on me that Marnie and Ann, both of you joined the board, and we had never seen each other in person. And to just be able to sit down and spend time with each other was really wonderful. I appreciated the workshop that Ann and I attended together on just capturing LGBTQIA+ voices in school districts, and just being really encouraged that we are not falling behind in there, that we are kind of at the front of that, and that feels really good to know. And I, always appreciate anytime we get to listen to Erin and whatnots. But the biggest takeaway I had from it was just so good to sit with the board and plan and have conversation and think and get to know each other.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought the WASDA conference was a particularly supportive experience for me, because I joined this board during the pandemic, during virtual meetings, and with no prior experience as a school board member. So I think it took the WASDA conference experience for me to feel like I'm ready to be proactive in growing in this role. Prior to that, I think I was taking a more passive role of learning, absorbing, observing. I was grateful for the wonderful modeling that I got from especially Brooke and Andrea as predecessors in these roles, and then Anne just shortly before me. But being in the context with so many other school directors, including newer school directors, and getting some of that entry level training about the legal expectations and opportunities for board leadership really gave me the confidence to start stepping into the places where I can be most effective in this role for and with our community. So I'm very grateful. I also really appreciate just seeing how other boards work, and then also recognizing what a high functioning and amazing team we have. This board, this administration, this staff, these students, I just think the level of mutual regard and trust and integrity and commitment to what we're all doing together is really high in this district, and I'm grateful for it. And then finally, the presentations were just extraordinary across the board. Everyone I attended offered me something really rich. And I was pleasantly surprised by the quality and volume of content. So I couldn't do everything, but the things that I did do taught me things that I'm gonna retain and build on going forward. Thank you.
Yes, a lot of the things have been said. So I will say that, my experience echoed Marnie's in that I'm fairly new to this work. I came on during the pandemic, and so didn't get to meet some of my fellow board members until graduation of last year. And so it was almost a little overwhelming to be in a room full of hundreds of people after, being in tiny spaces for so long. But it was also really a celebration, because to see that many people in the room, many of them volunteering their time to do the work, and just seeing the similarities between all of the districts and the work we're doing, whether it's the huge Seattle School Board and all of their challenges, or whether it's, Thorpe, or I got the privilege to sit next to a group of people who are from Grand Coulee Dam, which is about 20 minutes from where I grew up in my tiny school district. And just to hear them talk about doing the same work that we're doing was really powerful. It was also really galvanizing to hear the keynote speakers, and that there's still just that much energy and enjoyment in the work that we're doing. Even though we're tired, we're exhausted, we are still here, and our kids are still here. And the other thing that I really enjoyed, we misplaced Sol and Audrey about 20 minutes in, and then I saw them in a swarm of high schoolers, and I was like, they have found their people. And and it was just so beautiful to see. And it's just really neat to hear in the workshop that Andrea and I went to together around queer folks. About 4 kiddos were sitting in the front row, and I say kiddos because they were anywhere from about 16 to maybe 25. They were like, well, actually, and they took the workshop, and it was wonderful because that workshop facilitator just really powerfully just gave them the podium and guided them through that work. And it was just really beautiful to see. It was just this complete ad hoc moment where all of a sudden the pieces came together and the gears turned. And it was just a really beautiful moment to see. So that was really lovely. And it was just really great to see that we're not doing the work in a bubble. It can feel isolating here because we are such a small group in such a small place. We're so privileged in so many ways. And just to see and hear other people doing the same work in whatever their circumstances are, and doing it with celebration and doing it with joy and doing it with hope really felt great to me.
I want to echo what everyone else has already said. This was my third WASDA conference. This was my second in person and one virtual, and the difference is just amazing. The energy at the in-person ones are just phenomenal. The chance to actually sit down and talk with other board members and superintendents and student representatives is just amazing. I went to sessions on unleashing student potential, on the importance of diversity at the board level, on becoming a visionary board chair, on all sorts of different things. And the best part is we can still go back and look at the ones we didn't visit. So I want to remind all the board members that through our registration, we have access to the sessions we did not make it to. The first one I went to, though, was the Power of Student Voice. And that was so amazing because they had all the board members in a room with all the a bunch of the student reps, and then they separated us. And we talked about student voice separately, and then came back and they said, okay, board members, shut your mouths. We're going to listen to what the student reps had to say about student voice. And you can ask clarifying questions, but that's it. You're going to listen to them. And it was phenomenal to see all of these school board members just going, okay, excellent. So this is what we can do for our to encourage student voice in our district. And it was wonderful for me to hear how much of the stuff that they were suggesting we were already doing. Several of the student reps were very jealous that our student reps were in boot camp. I think our student reps would have rather been in the student voice thing, but they were very jealous of that opportunity to be treated as a board member. Whether or not you have a vote, still being clear that you have a voice, so you need to know this. And I think going forward, we're going to have the new student rep go to the boot camp, and the existing student rep go to whatever that other discussion is, just so we can have that different experiences that we can then bring back together. Things like just making sure that the student reps understand what's on the agenda before we sit down, so they can get the student voice from their peers and colleagues. Little things that we can do to make their job of getting student voice to us and sharing it with us easier and better. To the point, meeting with other student reps was fantastic. And talking with them, so many of them are jealous of the students that we have, not just our student reps, but also the students who are coming to us saying, I want this in my education. I want these classes. I want these opportunities. These are the things that matter to me. And they're like, they're doing what? That's phenomenal. How did you do that? And I got to say, I didn't do it. I said, that sounds like a great idea. Let's talk about it. Let's get it done. And having the student body that we have, inspired by the staff and the administrators that we have, is such a strength of this district. And going to WASDA reinforced that for me. These two found out about an opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. and talk to legislators and learn how to bring their voice to legislators, and drag me along, drag the district along. And we're going to do that here in the end of January. And having these two and the rest of their students is just fantastic. And WASDA reinforced that and helped me find some more things that we can do to support them.
I say, Brooke, a lot of the changes that you first talked about coming out of that meeting, the student voice meeting, you've been implementing. So there's a lot more that we have to do, but it's really good. You've been filling us in, and so that's much appreciated.
I was fortunate enough to go to the conference in place of Damian Green, since he couldn't make it. And it was truly rewarding for me, because I don't ever have a chance to, I'm always working behind the scenes. So getting to know the board members on another level and meet with the students and talk and get that relationship just is very helpful for us to get work done and get things going. But I went to a bunch of different conferences that the board didn't go to, like Robert's Rules of Order, really fun stuff, but actually very meaningful, because there's a lot of things that we can do to make things more efficient. And I took a whole lot away from that and actually shared that with people in the same position in other districts around, especially Snohomish County and this area, Island County, just as far as sharing the notes from that, to the point that they want to bring that speaker in to speak to all the board and people in my place around the different districts. So we might have another virtual Robert Rules of Order for everybody. But yes, no, the speakers are amazing. I mean, it's incredible the amount that we've gone through over the year. I think that was one of the best takeaways when they went through the 121 different things we've been going through that have just been milestone tasks. And it just gave us an empowerment to keep going and keep moving and keep working, because it's the kids. It's all about the kids.
Christy, I would just add that I found your attendance so incredibly valuable, and I would hope the board would consider you continuing to attend.
So I'm the cleanup batter. And what I would like to add, I did the same sessions and had the same epiphanies, but I want to add the other part, the part that really solidified us. We had meals together. We had one particular meal together that involved some folks from Chartwell's, and we were able to beam with pride because our student representatives really talked seriously about the quality of the food service and how we can improve it. And they were heard, which makes their attendance that much more valuable. The other thing I wanted to share is that there was some downtime. And in that downtime, we found ourselves in an arcade. And just want to point out that it was an unlimited opportunity for students and us to be together, and the students left before we did.
This is the way things go.
Yes, and us staying behind involved nothing more than continuing to play arcade games. But we played some very good air hockey games and some other fun things. And Brooke was able to spend his time in the Star Wars chamber. And, you know, we all sort of chuckle, but it really was valuable in that it allowed us to just have a conversation and a relationship with one another that was not about school business. So I really appreciated that opportunity in addition to all of the conferences we attended.
And just to be clear on that, the money for the arcade was personal spending, not district spending.
Absolutely. Personal spending. There were a lot of, you know, it's not like it used to be. It's like going to a casino. You can't just drop a quarter in the slot anymore. You got to get a card and you got to put the card in. You got to pay for the card. It's, you know, it makes me realize why I stopped listening to music past the 90s, right? I'm just getting old. Anyway, it was an awful lot of fun.
Anna and I shared an arcade card and we could not figure out how to get the tickets back to the card. We did not realize that it automatically happened. And we were like, but how does it know what card? We were quite confused for quite a bit of time. We are not.
Collectively, we probably spent $300 on one tiny stuffed animal. After
No,
all of that.
I won 2 stuffed animals with 2 drops of the claw, 2 drops, 2 stuffies. I think I did all right.
Are there any questions or, oh, let's finish this up first. In terms of closing the opportunity gap and supporting every student's success, the most successful districts and schools are ones where administrators feel the urgency of transforming to a strength-based culture, mitigating and eliminating inequities, and centering student voice. And I'll note we heard that after we came up with our goals for the superintendent. Many cultures, perspectives, and generations are part of our community. What is the thread that holds us all together? Love for our children. And that was a reminder. That's something that reminds me that whenever anyone was asked why they're doing this at WASDA, at least 50% of the time it was because of my kid or because of my friend's kid or because of my grandkid, or everyone here is connected to the students. And that is so valuable to keep them centered. I wanted to ask if there were any questions or comments from those who are sharing the room with us today, who are here in the workshop. Okay, I'm not seeing anything. There are no Q&As in the recording, so we'll move on to the board position vacancy. This we just want to get through to make sure that everyone is on the same page and we get the timing down and that everyone knows what is involved with this. We do have a board position to vacate. Sadly, Director Green chose to step down, and we have 90 days from his date of resignation, which was the 1st of January. So we have 90 days from there. So we have some time to do this. And the process is, there are 2 policies there's a policy and a procedure on this. I did not grab the numbers, but you can search for them on our board docs if you'd like to. But basically what happens is anyone who lives in his former district, which is the Clinton area. And you can see what that area is on our school board website. You can read the description. It describes a number of roads that enclose that area. Anyone who is in that district can contact the district to express their interest, and then they will be sent a packet of basically an application, which will then be passed back to the district and then on to the board. And then either at one of the upcoming business meetings, thank you, we've got it up there and got it there. So it is number 1115 and 1115P, which means procedure. So at one of the upcoming business meetings, we will have the opportunity to interview the applicants. The board will interview them in public. If there are more than 5 applicants, we have the option to go into executive session and narrow down the selection to 5. I believe that the last couple of times we went with 7 or 8. So that is an option for us to narrow it down. I would guess if we have a large number, we would want to do that. But if we have somewhere close to 5, we can get everyone in there. And then we interview them one after the other during a business meeting, and then step away to executive session to discuss, and then come back and vote in public. So the question to the board, and I recognize that we can't make motions or vote because this is a workshop, not a business session, but we have a decision to make on when to do that. I think it's clear that we don't want to do that at our next business meeting in January. That doesn't give people enough time to get applications completed and express their interest. So the question is whether we want to do it in February or March. So that would be the second meeting of each of those months. And the question is whether we want to fill the board as quickly as possible or give more time for more people to apply. So discussion.
I wonder if we could shoot for that February date, but dependent upon how many applications we had at that point, or if we knew people were, pending with an application, we could push that date forward to the March.
Don't have to be looking at me. This is a discussion here. This is not a decision by me. This is
To suggest just policy and what we've done in the past, that you consider advertising the position from now until, for argument's sake, February 15th or 20th, and then shoot for that second meeting in February, the business meeting, just in the event that you we close, let's say, on a particularly bad Wednesday and you can't do it in March, then we'd go beyond the 90. I would suggest that you shoot for the late February date, just because you never know what the weather will bring. That's just an opinion. Christy's ready to go. We have done this before, so we have an application packet and a process. We can put that process out with dates that back up to that February board meeting. If you don't object to that, we can certainly do it. We don't need a motion. That's really something we can do administratively if you're okay with the timeline.
I like that timeline, and I share the concern that waiting until the March meeting would be awfully close to the deadline. And should we have an unforeseen power outage or something of that nature, it might put us in a difficult position.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the sooner the better, but definitely adjust if we don't have enough applicants. I also think it's important to get the word out and make sure we get as many applicants as possible.
not seeing any Q&As here online. Anyone here present who has thoughts on this? I do want to open this up to opinions from the community on all of these points. I think that that's a very good. I ran the battery out of my mic. I think that's a very good concern to have, to make sure that we don't lose the opportunity to interview and appoint someone in case of inclement weather or something. So we're looking at dates on when to close the application then.
I
So-
would suggest the 18th, so it's the Friday before.
Mhm.
Then
Then we have
you
the
could
weekend
get-
to look over.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
And just a logistical question, will, this might be for Christy, since it is a particular part of the island, will those applications be screened like right at the top for the person's address being in the right place? So that
Yes.
We're not disappointing someone after we've done all the work. Okay.
Yeah, there's particular boundaries on the website and we'll point people to that. They have to live within the Clinton area as outlined by those boundaries. And there's a map on our website on the board page.
And we have a question here from Gwendy Hastings in Freeland. Did you get a written recommendation from the SOS group? We have gotten an email from the SOS group with some suggestions on not people, but thought processes. And we give that as much credence as we do any other comment from the community. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, let's keep on move. Oh, second. Amy Wheeler is, where do we find the application information? And I believe it's, if you could email.
We actually are going to place it on our website and it's going to be advertised. Christy will take care of that, probably end up on Drew's list at least and not, and also in the paper. There is a process for that. So if folks are interested and send an email, we will certainly send the application back out. We had already had one inquiry. So now that the board's actually had an opportunity to speak about it, we will get that going this week.
Okay, with that in mind, let's move on to COVID updates. Dr. Moshe.
Who knew that almost 2 years into it, I would still have to be doing COVID updates for us in our community. But here we are. So January 2022, remember our first school stoppage was March 2020. So this is also where we are. This is from April 2020 to the present. This is Island County. There obviously is going to be a peak and then a descent on Omicron, as we have heard from the Washington State Department of Health. For folks who are interested, we continue to keep our dashboard updated. I'm going to take you to it. It's on our homepage on our website. Just scroll down to it. So we keep track of cumulative cases as well as current cases. So you can see the number of current cases with students and staff, and then the cumulative number of cases. So we continue actually in our district to be in a very good place, especially compared to those around the state. I'm going to switch back now to my presentation. So we are in a situation where we have heard from the Washington Department of Health, as well as from OSPI, as to the expectations for school to remain in person, because we know that is the best method of instruction for our students, unless we are unable to staff our schools. And so we are not in that position. We are actually doing quite well in that our staff has been able to be at school. Very few staff out on any particular day, and we've been able to sub for them when they are out. Our attendance this week with students is actually better than it was a week ago. We still tend to be running at about 10 to 15% of our student body out, not because they are ill. Many are choosing to stay out, understandably. So once again, and Christy mentioned this when we were at WASDA, we heard about 121 changes that have happened, each on their own being a major change to what happens in schools. And that was in November, and I've lost count since November until now what that number has gone up to. So once again, on Friday, we received changes from the Department of Health. And we are continuing, as we have done since the beginning of this pandemic, to follow the recommendations of the Washington Department of Health, as well as the Island County Public Health Department and OSPI. So what do those changes mean for us? I linked it here. It's also linked on our homepage. And after this meeting this evening, tomorrow there will be information going out to all staff as well as all families in an email from me indicating the changes. I hope people continue to read the emails that come to them because they keep coming with changes and it's kind of hard to keep. The best and most reliable source of information is our nursing staff, who, without them, among all of the other people who work for the district, but without our nursing staff, we would be in a mess. So they really, really are working so hard to make sure that we're following the rules, keeping schools safe, testing everyone we can. But the changes here, just to summarize, we've now reduced to the Department of Health recommended 5 days quarantine for students, teachers, and staff who come in close contact with someone with COVID. They have to quarantine for at least 5 days after their last close contact. If they're in one of the following groups: 18 or older, completed the primary series of vaccines and not received a booster, or received Johnson & Johnson over 2 months ago and have not received a booster, or if they're not vaccinated. So if you remain asymptomatic and test results on day 5 are negative, you're done quarantining. If you choose not to test, then the quarantine remains 10 days. Students, teachers, and staff who come in close contact with someone who do not need to be quarantined if they're in one of the following groups: they have already received their booster, they're 5 to 17 years old and have both shots, or they've had a confirmed case of COVID within 90 days. So it may sound like a lot of information. The nurses have this information at their fingertips. It's also on our website. And again, we're going to continue following it. So we're also going to continue all the mitigation efforts, and we're going to continue to encourage any and all who are eligible to get their vaccination and their booster. Masks are critical. We also have the cloth masks. If individuals want a double mask, we have that for them. We're going to continue distancing and hygiene and all of the ventilation that we're doing. And as I said, our plan is to continue in person. So until we can't. And even in that, we would anticipate that maybe we'd have to close a classroom and go remote, or go beyond that, but we are not intending to shut down the district. And we are hoping that Island County continues as it has in being very low on the scale of COVID happening here. Our colleagues in districts across the water are closing down classrooms and buildings. So we are not immune, but we will follow the guidance of the Washington State Department of Health like we have been, and continue to operate, and hope that we are not in a situation where we have to shut down in-person learning. So I'm sure you have questions and I'm happy to answer. And Emmy Atwood, I know, is also tuned in. So if I run up against a question I can't answer, she will bail me out.
Thank you very much. And as we are waiting for folks online to type questions in, I will note that Ms. Maccaro has informed me that the school director application is available on the website under the school board tab. You can fill it in and print it or send a digital PDF copy to the address or to her email.
Okay, so my question going back to COVID is, what happens to a student if they're exposed at school? What is the protocol for handling that? And specifically, I'm curious about between those who are vaccinated and unvaccinated.
If a student is a close contact at school, they're notified that they are in fact a close contact. And parents are notified and they can make the choice as to whether or not they want to be tested. If they're a close contact at school, they will have to quarantine. They can quarantine for a lesser number of days if they test and are negative. So the testing is offered to them, it's not required. If one is vaccinated and boosted, the quarantine is reduced. If one is not vaccinated and doesn't test, the quarantine's 10 days no matter what.
So that we're sent home without parental notification. Can you answer that?
Knowledge of that, but if that's folks want to contact me because they feel like an error was made, I'm happy to investigate it and address it. I have no knowledge of that.
So currently, I believe that testing is available to those who are symptomatic or close contact. Is there a plan in place to increase the amount of testing so anyone who wants to get tested can, especially considering that it's really hard to find a test out in the community right now?
So thanks, Audrey. I have information on that. So there is a testing shortage everywhere. And we have tests on site, and we will continue to test asymptomatic students who were close contact or symptomatic students and staff, both. At-home tests are expected to be available, but when is the question? And they will come through the school district and be available for students and their families, but we don't have them yet. At this point, we have enough tests to continue the process we're using, but not to just offer them as a convenience. Folks are still going to have to use Island Drug or try and find those at-home kits for now until those other tests become available.
One more question I had is currently with the absent rate. I'll start over. So a lot of students are choosing to stay home as a precaution or quarantining. Is there a way to ensure that these students have equitable access to material so they don't come back to school asking the question, where did we leave off? That way we're continuing moving forward as a school with such a high rate of absence.
And my hope is our absentee rate, as I said, it's lessened from last week to this week. I don't know where it's going to be next week, but that's why all of our teachers use Google Classroom so that students can be kept up. And we don't have any plans to go back to a hybrid situation where teachers are Zooming and teaching at the same time at this time. So students will be kept up by individual teachers. And we're aware that there are students who are staying home and quarantining and staying home because they feel safer at home. And teachers are reaching out to them, but we're not changing our paradigm at this moment.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but we do still have one-to-one tech access for everyone, and we do still have some hotspots with would-be tell that have been given out for those to ensure access to those who do not have access at home.
Exactly right. And if anyone has connectivity issues, they can contact us and we will help them through that.
We have another question, but also a note that I actually forgot to note. Folks who do speak in person, please do include your name and location. That's on me. I didn't ask. So, what was that? Margaret King, Clinton, thank you. Gwendy Hastings, Freeland, are there any events upcoming that will be canceled, such as homecoming, prom, or sporting events due to COVID numbers?
We have already had to cancel some sporting events due to positive situations, but not to restrict them. But student athletes all have their own testing regimen that they have to engage in, vaccinated or not, in order to ensure play. There have been teams who have forfeited games or have rescheduled games because of situations with COVID, but we have not canceled in general at this point.
Prom is definitely not canceled. We talked about that yesterday, and homecoming is in 9 months, I believe. So we have no idea.
I don't see any other questions here. I don't have any more coming on. So we do have policy reviews still. I want to know.
I had one thing to add that I did get a question that came in regarding masks. For staff, we do have KN95s and N95s available still. For students, we have the, they call them procedural masks, the blue ones that students can wear along with their other mask if they want it double mask or as a single mask. But for students, we have those. So again, we're doing everything we can to continue to keep as COVID out as much as possible. We also have been operating since we started school in September, telling folks, especially staff, assume that everyone is positive and behave accordingly so that we can keep COVID as far away from us as possible.
Thank you. As we're moving on, I'll note that the microphone issues that we're having with some of them running out of charge should not be a problem going forward, because we also had a 4-hour retreat before this where we were using them extensively. So now we'll move on to policy. And I want to suggest that we combine our discussion of the first 3 policy points, which are our annual review of policy 3205, sexual harassment of students prohibited, 3207, prohibition of harassment, intimidation, and bullying, and 5011, sexual harassment of district staff prohibited, just because they're all part of the same. So take it away, Andrea.
So really what we're looking for is we are looking at the language of the policy, and I would encourage us to read it through with the lens of new learning that we have, that we gather every day. And we just want to look at, is there any language in the policy that we see we want to shift or change? What this conversation is not about individual instances where it has been rolled out or like discussion of the implementation of it. We are purely looking at the policy in its nature and entirety. So with that, I'll give people a few minutes to read through and then go ahead and step in if you see anything that you want to shift in the language.
I do want to note that we did look at these policies, or some of them, not too long ago. We're just doing the first instance of the annual review. So I wouldn't expect there's a ton here, but it's still good to take a look at them.
Nope. And between that time, we've gone to the WASDA conference, right? We've had new learning. For those following along at home, you can access these on the agenda. And so you can type in thoughts, suggestions into the Q&A. None of the changes are made tonight. They're just put into consideration for the business meeting. The one wonder that I have that we may want to discuss is in here, and it might be more appropriate for a procedure, but I'm wondering if we could add some language around the reporter having like choosing the adult in the room or choosing to have a trusted staff adult or some sort of person alongside with them. Part of why I'm thinking of that is the survey data that Dan presented earlier tonight. Do those people experiencing that harm feel empowered enough to report to potentially a person who looks like or represents the same kind of person that made the comment towards them? So for example, if I've received some sort of sexual harassment from a male, and I'm expected to report to a male, could I have a female administrator with me? And I'm wondering if we need to paint that in the language in this.
I think that's a fantastic idea. I was just looking through to see where we would do that. But I think that it's a fantastic idea that ties into something we were really pushing, including how Mr. Patton tries to talk to all of the incoming freshmen to make sure that they've got that person. And I think it's something that can reinforce. It might be better in policies, but I don't know. We can't really affect the procedures. So maybe policy is the place for it.
And the question would be, what are the parameters around the who, right? So, who do we want to include in those options? And it may be policy, it may be procedure. I'm open to, Joe, your input on where you feel like it should live, but that's one thing that's standing out to me that we might want to add.
We may want to verify this, but it is my belief that they can report to any individual in the school district. It doesn't have to be an administrator. So they could pick a counselor, a custodian, basically any employee that works for the district would be and they all, yes, they can do it online also.
Just to add, as part of good practice, we, for example, if we're doing a restorative circle, and it's led by a male mediator, he'll often ask a female staff member just to be present, to be a part of the process as well.
Andrea, I really appreciate the question. And I'm noticing that under the notice and training section, it does say that the superintendent will develop procedures to provide, et cetera, et cetera. And so this section does allow for there to be clarity around how students are advised about their rights as protected under this policy. So that might be a place to look at formalizing the invitation to choose a trusted adult to bring with one into these conversations.
So I think where this one comes up is I'm not sure that it's clear in 32.5. the investigation and response, it essentially says if the district knows that this has occurred, they have to investigate. But I don't see, like, if I am a student or a staff member, right, and I'm reading this, I don't see anything about what I do to report, where I do see that in some of the other ones.
If you look at 3205P, that's the procedure around it. Yes. The district is on notice and required to take action when any employee knows or in the exercise of reasonable care should know about possible sexual harassment. And it goes on to say what we are to do and how to be supportive. So that may address the concerns. I'm not sure if it does for you.
But if it's procedure, that's not us.
So we could, as a board, direct the administration to add verbiage to that effect to the procedure, I believe.
Looks like there's a bullet list in the policy of supportive measures. So just making sure that that exists under that supportive measures bullets.
Yeah, I don't know that we need to direct. I think it's good to have a conversation, and perhaps when administrators, you're talking with advisories about handbook conversations and whatnot, maybe stressing that they can choose who to report to and that it isn't a one person. Because Saul and Audrey let me know, but I don't know if you know that you can report to anyone.
So again, that would be, and again, don't need a recommendation. I don't think just having an understanding of having staff training around letting kiddos know their rights as well. Maybe in advisories or in whatever feels like, it sounds like, the freshmen get a little orientation, just making sure everybody knows their options and knows that there are many, many, many safe places to land if they're feeling like they have something to say.
I'm going to try using unmuting myself here. No, that doesn't work.
I'm going to just show on the website where, since we're talking about it now, where people can make a complaint. If you go here, it's under really a bunch of different tabs, but students, if you come right under here to Safe Schools Alert System, you click it. And you can do an anonymous report. You can actually put your name in there. Those messages come immediately to really myself, Joe, and Dan immediately, and then we send it out to the appropriate administrator to deal with the situation. Okay, so, and then you can also request at that time that there's somebody you want to be with you or that you need, you can add as much detail as you want. It can be anonymous as well. So.
And we do have a comment from Gwendy Hastings Freeland. Let's not overanalyze this. We're all mandated reporters and can report or have a student report to us. And that is a good point. And Gwendy, I do see another question here on another topic that we addressed earlier, but I'll bring it up after we're done with this discussion.
Any other thoughts on these three? Okay, so then in summary, we have no changes moving forward. Our next ones are purchasing authorization. This is one we review annually. Essentially, it means that if a purchase is going to exceed $15,000, that it requires board approval. We haven't really changed this in 4 years. I think the last time we changed it, we increased it from 10 to 15.
And I was curious on reading this. what other districts are using as their benchmark on this, what the district would like the new limit to be, and some thoughts, some ideas of what have fallen between the current limit and what you'd like the limit to be over the last year or two. That would be very helpful for us in this discussion.
So in researching that question, I looked at some of the other neighboring districts. Coupeville has a $50,000 limit. Oak Harbor, it has no limit whatsoever, just has to be within the budget. Granite Falls has 100,000, Lakewood has 75,000, Muckletail has no limit. So it's across the board. My recommendation would be that we use 75,000, which aligns with the state bid laws. Anything under 75,000, we don't have to do any type of formal bid process, but when we get to that point, we do have to, and that basically requires us to advertise for 30 days and do some other processing. So it is, we have the time to do it. The real consideration here is that on some of these smaller items, and most of those on that list are like $20,000, $25,000. You know, it's like an example would be the infield soil mix for the baseball and softball fields. It's $19,000, but we need board approval in order to do it. It's something we do every so often as far as part of the maintenance for the field. This would allow the maintenance department to go ahead and get that soil without waiting a month or so. And the problem with waiting, and I'll give you an example, JJ's probably better at giving you examples, but he gave me one today. We had a alarm panel at the transportation department that was constantly beeping. And it took us about 2 months to get it fixed because we had to wait to a board meeting, get approval because it was $19,000. I have such a headache from that. Thank you for fixing it. But it's one of those things that, you know, we could have done very quickly. And also because we had to wait almost 2 months to do it, we had to end up getting a different board because the one that we would have got was not available. It changed the price, it went up some, and, you know, so there's those variations. And that's really the reason for the request. And it has to do more with capital projects than it does with anything else.
So I personally would be comfortable with 75,000. I think that that's reasonable and works within state and federal funding requirements. And I think anything over that, we're going into a different process that the board would need to be aware of anyways.
Thank you. I agree that it's a very reasonable thing to raise the limit to 75,000. And I would just add that the folks working closest to the needs are the experts and probably have more insight into why things are needed, when they're needed, and what the best product or approach is. So I would certainly trust the spending to be done with that expertise.
And the other comment I would make is that the board actually approves these expenditures. It's just you're going to do it after the fact rather than prior. So it's still going to be within our budget and everything that goes with it, and you still have approval. It's just the timing of when that approval occurs.
There we go. Yeah, I completely agree. It makes sense to raise it to $75,000, especially for the scale of projects, capital projects that we're talking about. And considering what you mentioned about Coupeville, Oak Harbor, Port Townsend, bringing it up from 15,000, which compared to those schools seems completely, yeah, we have to step up a little bit on that.
I have a comment here from Ian Turner, who is the tech director here, and says, JJ and I would like to increase the limit at least for capital projects. Yeah, to 75,000. I agree that bringing it in line with the bidding limits seems like a reasonable place to put it. Yeah.
All right, our next policy is 3520, which has to do with student fees, fines, and changes. Essentially, we're just removing some language. Christy went through and added in some inclusive language around superintendent or designee. Essentially, the language that has been removed is kind of the barrier pieces. So students who have outstanding fines, students' grades, voluntary work, those kinds of conditional pieces have been removed from the language. I don't see any issues with it. Yes. Any discussion on that one? Anything in there in the Q&A? Okay.
As a student, I would just like to say how appreciative I am of this change in policy, because I don't think financial means should stop a student from receiving a diploma or having to do community service. So I think this is a huge step forward towards equity, and again, removing barriers.
I completely agree. It also makes it easier for me to graduate, hopefully.
I'd like to keep Saul around too, but I don't think that'd be fair to him. Yeah, I just wanted to note, I said it off mic, but this is in reaction to new legislation also. So these are legal requirements as well.
And then 3231, I think this is actually one that really levels the field a lot more in terms of equity. So what has previously happened is that we won't release student records if a student has any fines accrued on their accounts. And so if they transfer schools, their credits don't move. If they want to move on to secondary, we don't release those records. And so this is removing that barrier. Christy, thank you for also going ahead and catching all the guardians. Always appreciate that. Third paragraph, we'll add that. So again, all good things, and just.
Oh, that's a legal definition, yeah.
FF. Christy got it right. FF. So all good language. I would suggest we move forward with it. Thoughts? Q&A? You got the Q&A, Brooke.
Oh, no, there's nothing else.
All right, well, that's it for policy.
I do have one Q&A here going back to COVID that I want to get to. Gwendy Hastings, and this may be something that can't be determined yet, but I did want to ask, from Gwendy Hastings Freeland, are you going to allow students from other schools to prom this year?
So at this time, we are withholding an answer on that. We're hopeful, but we won't know until we get closer to April when prom actually is.
And I'll hold just a moment to see if there are any other comments or questions. But that's the last thing on the agenda. So if there's any other comments or questions on items on the agenda, now's the time to discuss them. If you have comments or questions on things that are not on the agenda, please join us at the next meeting, which is our business meeting, where we have an opportunity for public comment. Or you can email the board, the superintendent, or I always urge you to go as far down on the chain of command as is possible, because they will have the most information. So if it's a classroom issue, talk to the teacher. If it's a building issue, talk to the principal. If it's a whole district issue, talk to the superintendent first, because we want to get you to the person who has the most explicit and pertinent information on whatever you're asking about. I don't see anything else coming in. I don't see anything else from those around us. So with that in mind, I declare this meeting adjourned.